there will be no real non-controlled currency in the world.
We're coming for you, banks.
And this is exactly what these Bitcoin Cash people are building.
Shout out to the Dragon Riders and the House of the Dragon.
Because it's a completely different situation than it was 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, that's how frogs get boiled.
And they added a bunch of new opcodes and they're doing a bunch of things over there.
It will be the most hated rally ever because a lot of people from some propaganda hate Bitcoin Cash.
Hello and welcome back to the Bitcoin Cash podcast, following Bitcoin Cash on its rise to global reserve currency. This is episode number 175, Bitcoin Civil Wars, featuring Tone Vays. Today is Saturday, the 21st of February, 2026. On the price, BCH hanging in on the top 10, $567.99 per 100 megasats. One BTC sat buys 119.6 BCH sats, also flat. And one ETH buys only 347 megasats, so we're up there. 751 Selene 30-day users. Tokenaut TVL at 7,940 with 52 Laylas available for Bliss. Our guest today, Tone Vays, is a Bitcoin OG, a trader, and a semi-retired Bitcoin educator / YouTuber, but he's come out of retirement to cover the current drama, and we're very glad to have him here as well on the show. How you doing, Tone? How'd you get into Bitcoin?
I'm good. Well, I was working on Wall Street at the time, and I started following the Ron Paul campaign for president for the 2012 run. So it was in 2011. And as funny as it sounds, the only place to actually watch Ron Paul's speeches and Ron Paul's attempt to win the Republican nomination for the presidential run was on a channel called Russia Today, RT,
yes,
which has been banned in the U.S. after the Russia-Ukraine situation began. But at the time, I started watching RT because they were actually covering all possible people running for president, and that's when I discovered Max Kaiser's show on RT, and I learned about Bitcoin from there because of the Silk Road use case. That's where I heard about it. I saw the Silk Road graphic in your intro, ironically.
Yes.
But however, surprisingly to people's, I hate to break people's ideas of Wall Street, there not that much drugs going on. Like I was never, I never used any. So using Silk Road was never an interest of mine. It's not like the movie Wolf of Wall Street. There's really not a lot of drug use on Wall Street. Most people are just family men, going home to their families. Now, it only took once I eventually joined the Bitcoin world, it only took a couple of weeks before I'm hanging out with people and everyone is doing cocaine. But back on Wall Street, that almost never happened. So that use case didn't get me interested. But what did get me interested was in 2013 when the Cyprus banking confiscation happened. That was April 2013. Bitcoin starts pumping to like $200. And I remember sitting at home going, what do you mean the government can just take your savings out of your bank account to bail the banks in? And that's what happened in Cyprus. So they took, if you had over 100,000 euro in your bank account, even if it was legally earned, they took half of that money to bail in the Cyprus banks as a trial run as to how the population will react to something like this. It's a little island, so no one's going to really fight back. So that was like my awakening call that maybe people should be saving money in something that is unconfiscatable. And that's what led to me using the word unconfiscatable when I started talking about Bitcoin publicly. And that's been my brand. It's an event now. It's a poker tournament now. But that kind of led me down that path. I eventually quit Wall Street to trade. I never really liked having a boss. And in 2015, I finally said, hey, I'm going to quit. And I'm going to just trade my money that I've saved from working there for 10 years. I was never much of a spender. And but I wanted to hedge my bets. So besides being a trader, I opened a physical business. I started doing content creation, and I started traveling and speaking at Bitcoin conferences as well and other conferences. And I've really, really started to enjoy the life of travel and public speaking, and more people wanted to listen. So I ended up opening my own YouTube channel in 2016. And eventually it became very hard for me to trade because my life was just about travel and speaking. 2016 is also when the debate started over how is Bitcoin going to scale, which started to escalate in early 2017, where I had 3 famous debates with Roger. I remember the first one was in February at an event called the Narcopoco in Mexico. And then the second one was around May. That was on the cruise through the Mediterranean from Barcelona, Spain, that ended, I think it was Barcelona to Barcelona, stopping in Italy and stuff, and France. And then the third one was, I think, in Malta. That was more in the summertime. That was like maybe June, right before the split happened in, we can talk about the history, but July, August were the interesting months of the resolution to the block size debate.
Yeah, and do you have any reflections on any of that in terms of, like, for instance, what's your relationship like with Roger? You know, because in this case where people know you as debating him very publicly, you know, when the cameras are off, do you still get along? Do you still have a shared interest in Bitcoin, or would you like not chat to him outside of that?
You know, we all throughout the debates, we did keep chatting, but after that Malta debate, which was hilarious, by the way, I actually had to do a follow-up video. We had a bet on stage that Roger accused me of cheating on the bet. I mean, that was just hilarious. You know, after that, we didn't really speak all that much. And then after the big chain split happened, no, we kind of didn't really speak that much. The next time I heard from him was after he, you know, got house arrested in Spain over the whole tax issue. And I'm happy he didn't end up going to prison. I'm happy he resolved it. I was surprised he had that much money to pay the government, like $44 million. I knew he had that kind of money before, but I mean, I don't know how much Bitcoin he held on to. If he converted it all to Bitcoin Cash, then I would be surprised he still had $44 million to pay off the government. But yeah, that was bad. But also, no, we didn't really keep up. I mean, it's life gets busy, you know, and it's hard to keep up with everyone. And so Roger and I didn't really keep in touch after that. But before that, we used to hang out a lot. I mean, we were pretty good friends. Even while we were debating, we were still, you know, had, you know, pretty good, messaging with each other, still even arguing on Twitter. Just the other day, another one of my friends decided to take a screenshots of our DMs and post it to Twitter. And I replied, I'm like, dude, even Roger Ver didn't do that kind of shit, you know, and him and I were in way more heated debates.
That's good. Have you read Hijacking Bitcoin?
You know, I've seen parts of it, but I kind of lived it. So I didn't really go out of my way to read it. Also, I don't have the attention span to read books. I actually
get the audiobook.
Even audiobooks is a little hard for me, right? Because my attention span is usually an hour or two of audio as well. My life's all over the place. If I have to stop, I just don't come back to it, right? So I can only listen to something if I know for a fact I will be able to finish that audio before I have something else going on, which is also why I don't do audiobooks, because they require stopping and coming back to them. So like a 3-hour podcast, like a Joe Rogan podcast, listening on 2x is usually the longest I go. So I have not read that book, but I lived it. I just don't see how I read anything, how I would learn anything new from it. And I agree with him on some things. I mean, I agree with it. I I agreed with them. Not really back then, but soon after. I do agree that there are problems at Bitcoin Core. Even at the time, I was like, yeah, Core isn't ideal, but at the time, Core was way better. Going into this particular one, which we're going to discuss, I am not a fan of Bitcoin Core. I think they need to be completely overhauled. And I guess, what's the word I'm looking for here? Rehabilitated. I think Core needs to, and it's hard to say like Core needs to do this or that. Core is a pretty decentralized entity. So, rehabilitating Core requires a centralized point of control to rehabilitate it, which is why it's probably going to be impossible. But this is also one of those things that keeps making Bitcoin resilient. It's really a very interesting dynamic.
So if you were going to, if you were the emperor of Bitcoin, how would you go about it though? Like you say, okay, it's a big group of people and it's hard to maybe move it in one specific direction. But if you were going to give it some direction, separate to attempts like the Nods Brigade or anything to split off and make a competitive alternative, if you were going to reform it from inside, how would you start?
Okay, so if I had some kind of power, right? If I was, I don't know, if I had the time. I mean, I think it's still doable. If I had the time, I would try to put together, a group of people, like a respected group of people that have been in Bitcoin a while. Like I would still put Adam back into this group, even though the little island thing is, being held over his head right now. But I still consider Adam Back to be one of these thought leaders in the Bitcoin space. Somebody like Giacomo, even someone like Jimmy Song. So I would try to put together a group of very technical people who understand Bitcoin code, but don't actually code it. And one of the reasons why people like Giacomo and Jimmy Song and even Adam, well, maybe less so Adam, have an advantage is that they're pretty social people. And unlike you've met some developers that aren't very social at all. And then you have someone like Merch, who's been on my show. He's a pretty social guy as well, but he's actually a developer. And I would have this group of people like in between the developers and you. So you have a layer of developers. You have a layer of technical people that are more,
extroverted, front facing,
client facing, and Bitcoiner facing, and also the public facing. So these are two different things, right? So this was kind of my job on Wall Street too. I was in the quant space. Like we were building risk models, which are very technical. I mean, we're talking PhD quants, C# developers, C++ developers, database developers, right? All of that comes together into a risk model. This risk model is being used by a bunch of financial guys with CFAs that don't know how to code or have basic coding skills. And somehow, everyone is sitting in a big open room, and we can't have 30 people with CFAs talking to 30 people that barely speak English, coding the shit that they're using. So all communication was going through me. And eventually I ended up having 2 more guys on my team because we can't have these 2 people talk to each other because they don't speak the same language. Like anything that the finance guys want goes through me before I talk to the developers. Anything that developers build, I get to check out to see if if a finance guy would be able to use the products that they're pushing out. And then so that kind of community, like no developer should ever be doing an interview, right? That's insane. Like the reason why they were able to go after Gloria Zhao is because, she opens her mouth when people interview her, and that's not developer's job, right? Like Chris Guida, I don't know, maybe he cloned himself, but he spends all day, every day hassling developers to personally explain to him every freaking word of every freaking sentence, right? So this annoys the hell out of me. These people need to be coding. They're not supposed to be speaking. So that's the first thing I would fix is that, hey, if you're a developer, if you want to say something, you talk to us, and then we'll, have like a PR team, right? Like in between. That would solve a lot of problems. And this same team, not only are they actually taking the time to properly explain what these developers are doing and why they are doing it, they also can gauge the room, not from a technical perspective, but from a social attack perspective, and come back to the developer saying, hey, technically, we do need to do this. We do need to raise the op return limit or eliminate the op return limit technically. Like almost every single developer of the Bitcoin code agreed that the op return limit needs to be eliminated. The thing is, it was never explained why, right? So these people may be able to gauge the room better and then say, hey, we may need to spend another year like explaining and doing some podcasting and doing something, not you guys, but people from the core team, not the core team, but like maybe there'll be some funding for this. Maybe people will volunteer. Like, hey, listen, like there's an unreasonably large amount of people in the Bitcoin space that don't understand the technical issue as to why this limit needs to be removed. And it's not ready for it yet. Yes, we believe you. Let's have it in there. Let's have it all coded. But as far as having this code go to production, we may be a little too early. Before like all shit breaks loose like it did. So it's things like that. Also, one of the latest issues with Core is there were some DEI practices that should never have happened. So once again, if there was one more kind of like layer there that of people that are anti-DEI moves, they can say, hey, this is stupid. And again, if you look at people like Jimmy Song, people like myself, people like Giacomo, we're definitely not DEI people, and we never were, right? Like it's you can go back to the COVID days and you can kind of see who would be caring what others say and who doesn't. So moves like DEI were bad. Also groups, right? So because it's such a decentralized entity that doesn't really have any kind of proper leadership at the top, that leadership could be considered centralized. But again, if this leadership is a bunch of volunteers that only care about Bitcoin succeeding, then they would be able to point out things like John Attack pointed out. It's like Bitcoin, the main Bitcoin core devs used to be all just decentralized all over the world, just random people at home. But now most of them are in America. Most of them are actually on the West Coast in San Francisco. A bunch of them are going to the office. And once you have a decent enough group of people that are always seeing each other in person, they kind of start to alienate the people that are working at home. So either everyone needs to be in the office or no one needs to be in the office. And that's one of the things that John Attack pointed out. So it started to get very cliquey, and there started to be some censorship even inside the group, and some ideas were not welcomed. And I know it's difficult, but the biggest problem that Bitcoin Core has is the PR issue. But because it's a decentralized group, it's hard to have a PR issue. But referring to, even me sitting here referring to it as Core is incorrect, right? Core is like 100 developers. About a dozen of them are more important than, like, I said, if the top dozen is probably cumulatively more important than the next 80. So it's like, it drops down fairly quickly, and you can't control what another person does. It's like someone is like, oh, you see, Core did so-and-so on the forums. It's like, yeah, like one guy from Core did something, probably pissed off the other 90 people at Core, because now everyone blames, the central entity that doesn't exist for something stupid that one person did because they were having a bad day. So it's things like that. And bugs like the wallet deletion bug I mean, that happens. I mean, that happens because things are missed, and the not side was pointing to it like this is some kind of something that Core did on purpose because they wanted to delete someone's wallet, and that's completely insane, right? It was an accident that 100 amazing developers missed, and the takeaway from this is if 100 qualified developers missed this bug, what do you think is going to happen with knots when if they succeed and they have 2 developers, right? Like it's a completely wrong takeaway. Like yeah, you're gonna have bugs like this, but 100 times more often and 100 times worse because you don't have the kind of eyes that Core has on the code.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. It will always be the case that, I mean, even whether you have 2 developers or 100, even with 100 developers, those 100 are not each individually reviewing each PR, but it increases the surface area that a couple of people can afford to look at each specific thing. And maybe you have more review as each release rolls out and so forth. But bugs are always going to happen.
Right.
And personally, I thought Mechanic did an excellent job when at the time when his response video was saying, guys, bugs happen, like we shouldn't jump on this. And that proved to be very wise because, of course, a week or 2 later, it flipped around and now people are digging up bugs in the BIP 110 client. So I think everybody just needs to understand that bugs are going to happen. You know, it's more about your effectiveness of your response, right?
Right. So 2 more quick things on that. So the most important thing I didn't say is I do believe in multiple client implementations. I had no problem with knots before they pushed for the user-activated soft fork out of consensus. And we're going to talk about that throughout the podcast. But knots gaining momentum and picking up, 5, 10, 20% of node usage was a great first step. I mean, they completely messed it up with the UASF, but that was the start. So what needed to happen? Well, another competing client besides knots, maybe 2 more, slowly start to get momentum. And these projects would, as they get momentum, they would pick up some more funding. They would also be able to pick up more developers. These developers could be new developers that aren't being welcomed into Core. These developers could be disgruntled Core developers that can now come over to these other competing clients. And yes, this could have taken years, but that's fine, right? Because if you rush things, you destroy your project. Like if a startup moves too fast, they can destroy themselves just like if they, move too slow. They're both equally dangerous. And so these competing clients should have gotten a lot more of a market share away from Core, but not just market share in usage, also in developer support and industry support. The other big thing for me is not all nodes are created equal. The more economic weight of your node, the more relevant your node is. And a lot of plebs and a lot of just users of Bitcoin that DCA $20 into Bitcoin once a week and run their node, they think they're equally as important as a Michael Saylor to the Bitcoin network. And I'm sorry, you are not, okay? Michael Saylor is an economic node just by the amount of coins he's hodling. Coinbase is an economic node by the amount of Bitcoin by the amount of users that would listen to what Coinbase prefers to do. A big mining operation is probably the biggest weighted economic node. The bigger the mining operation, the bigger the weight of your node. So a mining farm like Mara, like a mining company like Mara, which is like 5 or 10% of the entire network, I mean, that node alone is probably worth 10 to 20,000 Bitcoiners, maybe even more, maybe 100,000 users with a node that DCA, that don't own a company, that don't even work full-time in Bitcoin. So not all nodes are created equal. And these other competing clients to Core need to get that market share first. And then Core would have a lot less power. But trying to push Core out with what I consider a dangerous fork because it can split the network is the worst way to go, and they went in a bad direction. So I will I'll leave it on that because I really want to go back in history and talk about the 2017 days.
Yeah, no, we can in a second, but I think this is really interesting. I want to hit one or two more things. So, like, for instance, what you said there about too fast versus too slow, I feel like that's a big point of contention because, like you're saying, trust takes time to build up, especially not only among the developers, but among the industry. It takes a very, very long time to build up, actually. And the BIP 110 guys, they're in the situation of feeling like there's urgency, which is what's causing the problem. From their point of view, maybe things have been going wrong for a while, but maybe even since the 2023, the ordinal stuff started. So from their point of view, they've been trying to sort of advocate and slowly for 2.5 or 3 years, which interestingly is the exact same thing that happened with the big bloggers, right? And then at a certain point, it reaches, like, it boils over. Frustration is like, nothing is happening. We don't have a whole decade to become credible in the industry. Like, we have a problem now and we need to fix it. What would you say about that?
So yes, there is a problem. This problem is a lot smaller than catastrophists want you to believe. And is there an urgency to solve the problem? Not really. It's not an urgency, right? I see, like I said, I'm watching core trend in the wrong direction, and all attempts to change the direction of where core is going are failing very badly because, and this is the latest example of that, right? It's just, it's kind of like it because it's very hard to change it. So I think the concerns are grossly overblown, and the solution has been a total disaster. So is there going to be a way to fix it? I don't know, right? But the way I see it is when core version 30 was released, literally the day of the release, the price of Bitcoin was at an all-time high. The confidence in Bitcoin was at an all-time high. Yes, we have the ordinals crap and the runes and the stamps and all this other nonsense on Bitcoin. But at my Unconfiscatable conference in 2023 or 24, I don't remember, we actually had a debate on whether crap like Ethereum-style crap being built on Bitcoin is good for Bitcoin or bad for Bitcoin. And to be honest, it's a debatable issue, right? The Knots camp makes it sound like it's the death of Bitcoin by making it more like Ethereum, but it's actually somewhat debatable. I would prefer not to have that stuff on there. Personally, I would prefer not to have it. However, I will acknowledge the fact that had Bitcoin took on some of the Ethereum use cases, the biggest one of which being Tether, I can easily make the argument Bitcoin would already be over $250,000 today, right? Because there's just not enough Bitcoin to go around. And if the Tether use case was built on top of Bitcoin from day one, yes, other crap would have also been built on top of Bitcoin. I can easily see Bitcoin taking a large chunk of Ethereum's market cap, and Ethereum would be dead today. And but remember, you can't just add Ethereum's market cap to the Bitcoin market cap because there's a finite supply of Bitcoin. This would be taking even a third of Ethereum's market cap into Bitcoin. That would probably send Bitcoin 10x because there's just not enough Bitcoin to go around. Yes, the blocks would have been full. Yes, transactions would have been expensive, but it also would have skyrocketed the price of Bitcoin, right? So is that a good trade-off? I don't know if it's a good trade-off. I'm just taking it as a realistic viewpoint. So the people that want some of these Ethereum use cases on top of Bitcoin, and maybe one or two of them is going to be useful because you know what? I don't have a problem with Tether. In fact, You know how in the beginning of this podcast, you're like, Bitcoin Cash is sitting number 10 on market cap? I don't think it's number 10. I think it's higher. I don't think stable coins should be on the list, right? I think they're completely independent, right? So I think there's coins and there's stable coins, right? So you eliminate Tether, you eliminate USDC, and now you guys are number 8, right? I mean, it's still not, I don't think it's all that great, but at $500. But these are completely different. Like, I don't think they should be on coin market cap compete. I mean, they're not competing. Like Tether and USDC are not competing with these, with tokens that have a floating exchange rate based on supply and demand, right? That's not what Tether and USDC are. They're fully backed by the dollar. So there is an argument to be made there, and completely ignoring this argument and saying we need to centralize the system to get rid of all this shit because we know what's a good use case and what isn't a good use case. I think that's insane. I mean, that's complete insanity. You kind of let the market decide. Bitcoin still has a 1 megabyte limit. We can go back in time and we can say, hey, maybe the SegWit block size increase by creating witness data was a bad idea that got the ball rolling, and the promises of Taproot did not materialize. I mean, this is the discussion we should be having. But just because you pushed out something incorrect into production of a decentralized network like Bitcoin doesn't mean you should be rolling it back, because rolling it back is potentially more dangerous than rolling it out. You live with it, and then you say, okay, this was not great, especially Taproot. I mean, Taproot was presented to Bitcoiners like myself as, this is better for Bitcoin security, this is better for Bitcoin's privacy, and this will optimize scaling as well. And what it turned into was, yes, we got these benefits, but 80% of the uses of Taproot became ordinals and turning Bitcoin a little bit into Ethereum. And again, you can debate it if this is going to push the price of Bitcoin up. And I mean, you have proof that it helped to push the price of Bitcoin up because the price of Bitcoin was at an all-time high, right? So clearly, the Taproot, the use case of the Bitcoin blockchain, by putting, by making it a little more like Ethereum, it certainly didn't hurt the price of Bitcoin.
Well, you can't say that. That's a bit of an economic fallacy, right? You can't see the unseen cost. It's possible if there was no Taproot, BTC would be even higher. So it's hard to say, but it certainly hasn't stopped it reaching a new all-time high.
It's hard to say, but considering what Bitcoin has done the last 6 months, right, and it's been going down, and yes, I'm not. I mean, it's a hard correlation to make, but I mean, like it'll be easier to make it in the future. But Bitcoin's always been correlated with the S&P 500, and S&P 500 continued to make new all-time highs after October, and Bitcoin is now sitting at a 50% decline. So something had to have caused that, right? And the biggest issue that I see in Bitcoin is this fight over spam on top of Bitcoin, assuming someone can define spam. I have my own definition of spam on Bitcoin. I don't see these ordinals. I don't see these ordinals as spam. I see them as like stupid. I see them as stupid. I don't like them. I don't want them. But they're not necessarily spam to me because the person creating them maybe is like a scammer in my eyes. I mean, he can debate what I mean. Richard Hart doesn't think he's a scammer, but to me, he is, right? So I see people creating these ordinals and stamps and all this other crap. I see them as they're smart people that are creating them. They're convincing some other person that this is worth buying for speculation and they'll make money on it. So people are speculating on it. So here's what spam actually, here's how I would define spam. You're adding stuff to the Bitcoin blockchain for the purposes of spam. As the best example is actually the Roger Ver and what happened with Bitcoin Cash in 2017 after the fork. After the fork, when Bitcoin is starting to pull away in August and September. And what do you do to sway the miners and the users that Bitcoin Cash is the better scaling solution over Bitcoin? Well, if Bitcoin transactions are super expensive and Bitcoin Cash transactions are cheap, then people will migrate in August, September, October, November of 2017. So the Bitcoin blockchain was absolutely spammed with 1 set per byte transactions. There were millions and millions and millions of them. And I know this because my wallets got spammed, and like they did. And I remember that Bitcoin transactions were $100 in December of 2017. So the price of Bitcoin is rising. Bitcoin is hard to move around, and the blockchain just got spammed. Like someone literally was paying all day, every day to spam the Bitcoin blockchain with hundreds of thousands of 1 set per byte transactions. This probably cost millions of dollars, but it was certainly a lot cheaper to do than creating ordinals. You didn't have to create a business around ordinals. You didn't have to make websites. You didn't have to make a market. You can just spam the Bitcoin blockchain with 1 set per byte transactions. It was similar to Satoshi Dice, but Satoshi Dice was only sending people 1 set per byte transactions if they made a bet on Satoshi Dice to tell them, hey, you lost a bet. Here's a 1 Satoshi kickback, just so you know that we know that you made a bet and you lost, right? So that was actually had a little bit of a use case. You can say that wasn't necessary, but it was kind of like an acknowledgement thing. So that to me was actual spam. So here's another example of spam, right? So the whole op return thing, the op return limit was removed, and now you can send a giant op return. If someone is creating a giant op return because they actually want to advertise something, or they want to, they think that something is important and they want to, permanently put it into the Bitcoin blockchain, right? They will pay for that space. And they see it as important. And but then you'll have people, like, I can see this happening again. Like, if this UISF BIP 110 succeeds, I can envision a similar thing, and where the other side would have to make the legacy chain, well, I call it legacy, versus BIP 110, which would be the new fork chain. They have to make the legacy look bad. So they would be the ones that are sending these giant op returns, probably with very evil content in them, that CSAM stuff they're against. They are the most incentivized people. So again, after Bitcoin Cash split off, their incentive was they were the biggest spammers of the legacy chain. I mean, you guys call yourself the legacy chain, right? So we can debate that. But they were the most incentivized people to make Bitcoin expensive. So the people that become most incentivized to make Bitcoin data storage are the people that are breaking off calling Bitcoin data storage. So if they can, or if they had someone with the money, right? Like if they had a Roger Ver, maybe a Jack Dorsey, right? Jack Dorsey is super rich. Probably, we'll see, right? So like a Jack Dorsey type, if they had a Michael Saylor type on their team, right? Maybe they have some others that I don't know about, but a Jack Dorsey will type. I'm not saying it's Jack Dorsey, but someone wealthy enough that would say, hey, I will be willing to spend $10 million and put nasty stuff into the legacy chain in order to convince the miners that they are now going to be legally liable for mining these blocks to get that site over. That to me would be pure spam, because the purpose of it is spam. The purpose of it isn't to like scam another person, or they believe that this picture of a monkey is going to be worth $1 million in the future, right? So they're not building a company around this, right? advertising it, going to conferences like Udi and Eric Wall with Taproot Wizards. I mean, yes, it was stupid. Yes, it was silly, but at least they were, open to the world on what they're doing, right? This would be sneaky behind the scenes. And this is the main difference, right? Like these ordinals people, these runes people, like Michael, what's the guy that does the
like Mike in Space?
Mike in Space, right? They're open about what they're doing. I mean, Roger Ver wasn't open about spamming them. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was Calvin Ayre, right? Maybe it was somebody. Maybe it was Jihan. Like, I don't know who it was, right? But someone was spamming the shit out of the Bitcoin blockchain to make transactions expensive, and they weren't open about it, right? So this is the big difference. So someone is going to be pushing these large op returns if there is a fork in Bitcoin, and that person is not going to be open about it. They're going to do it secretly behind closed doors, and the only purpose of that would be pure spam. That is spam to me, right? Everything else, hey, like Adam Back built Hashcash, and that is literally what decides what is a valid transaction or not. There is a fee market for it. Bitcoin still has a 1 megabyte block limit, which was increased through SegWit with witness data to up to 4 megabytes if it's used in a specific way. And again, if we had a time machine, if I had a time machine, I would go back and tell myself, Tone, maybe you should speak out against the compromise of making a block size increase with SegWit. And but what's done is done.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few different things in that. The first thing I'll say is that while somebody probably was sending a lot of transactions at that time, I personally didn't have my wallet spammed. It would be good to go back and check the blockchain analytics to see how many of those one-sat transactions there are. But I believe that happened. I mean, I would also say the high fees was also a result of just the exploding network effect of BTC at that time. That was just Bitcoin was growing exponentially, which is why the big blockers felt there was so much urgency in the first place. So the increasing network effect constrained by the block size limit was what created the high fees in my mind, although it's possible there was nefarious attempts to sort of conflate that or expand it. What you say about SegWit is quite interesting, because I've heard you and other people explaining in retrospect that maybe the SegWit block weight increase as it is. To me, I feel like saying it's a block size increase is a bit of sleight of hand, because still it's 1 megabyte. And the reason that it's important that it was not the block size and the block weight that was kind of added to change those calculations is that it's an attempt to distract from how many surrounding issues there were. Like, big blockers were not fans of the 1 megabyte limit, but it's not literally about the 1 megabyte limit, right? It's a broader point about, for instance, if you have a block size limit, you change the fee market. So you're going for high fees instead of low fees. It's kind of, is Bitcoin meant to be a peer-to-peer cash system, or is it meant to be, something else? Is it meant to be digital gold? So the 1 megabyte limit, I feel, is emblematic of a lot of those surrounding issues. And then people saying, well, we did increase the block size limit. It's not really true. The block weight limit, and there's more capacity, but then even that has come to be kind of regretted, So I wonder what do you think?
100% agree with you. It was a bit of a sleight of hand. I couldn't agree more with everything you said. And I would love to talk about this, because I know Simon Dixon has recently done, went back in history and talked about how he remembers the 2017 block size war. Mechanic has gone back in history, how he remembers the block size war. We've discussed it on Twitter Spaces with Wicked and who I don't remember Wicked being around during that time. Mr. Hodel was certainly around during that time. Shinobi was around during that time. So everyone remembers it a little differently. Jimmy and I debated how we remember it. I actually almost want to go back and rewatch my own videos, because I was doing almost daily coverage with Jimmy. So if Jimmy and I disagree how we remember those 2017 days, and we were doing daily videos together, right? Like, everyone's going to remember it differently. But yeah, no, it was a sleight of hand, and it wasn't a proper block size increase, but there are reasons for that. And the two biggest reasons are as follows. So here's how I remember it. Back in 2016, I mean, Roger Ver and I were talking about the block size increase part as far back as like early 2016. So that's the other thing. Before I go on with that story, you're right. It wasn't the only reason the spam on the Bitcoin blockchain in second half of 2017 wasn't the only reason why the fees were so high. The other reason was how popular Bitcoin got in 2017, because Bitcoin started the year 2017 at about $600-700, and by the end of the year, it made it all the way to $17,000. And I would say by percentage, 2017 was probably the biggest gainer. That it was the height of the S curve. If you ever, there's one video I recommend everyone watch. Everyone. It's still probably in my, if not my number in my top 3 videos, what blew my mind about Bitcoin. And it was a video by a man named James D'Angelo titled Bitcoin 101 Blackboard S-Curve. Anyone watching this, you can just put it into Google, on YouTube. Hopefully it's still up there. The video is from like 2014 or something. James D'Angelo, Bitcoin Blackboard 101 Blackboard S-Curve. And I think the S-Curve so far has been in 2017. That's when the most number of people joined the Bitcoin space. So yes, that has something to do with it. However, SegWit, if it wasn't for the big controversy, like SegWit, there were 2 things. SegWit was a 2-part thing.
Yes.
SegWit. Like SegWit 2x was like a 3-part thing, right?
Yes. Yes.
SegWit 2x should be named SegWit 3x because SegWit had 2 things in it. SegWit was a transaction malleability bug fix plus a sleight of hand block size increase, to quote you, Jeremy, right?
Yes.
It was, and Luc Dajur was instrumental in figuring out that code, right? On how to create that. So, and SegWit was a bit controversial. I'm not going to say it was very controversial, but it was controversial enough that fixing transaction malleability part was delayed for over a year to a year and a half. So that means the Lightning Network was delayed from starting by a year and a half. So it's one of these things, like this is kind of like the thing that the government kind of does, right? It's kind of like, again, I see it because I don't want to go too much off tangent, but like one of my favorite projects in the world right now is a place called Prospera in Roatan, Honduras. They're building the first private city in the world. And this private city had a plan that they're going to be, 10,000 people living in the city, and they're going to create all this economic activity. And the government of Honduras agreed to give them full autonomy on laws, so they can make their own laws. So there's no health inspectors there. There's no building code inspectors. Like they have full autonomy on laws, and they had this plan to have 10,000 people in the city. Well, then the government changes to be a communist government. They start to make life difficult for the city. Then COVID comes and the federal government shuts down all travel to the country. And so obviously the city can't meet its goals of having a 10,000 population between the global lockdowns of COVID, plus the current hostile government. And now the same hostile government now comes back and uses these metrics. Well, you promised there would be 10,000 people living here, and you promised there would be 2,000-3,000 Honduran jobs, and you're not even close, right? So this is what happened, right? So the big blocker side, and like Jihan Wu and Bitmain and some of the businesses, they were preventing the transaction malleability fix by mandating a block size increase alongside the transaction malleability fix. So everything ended up being debated, everything ended up being delayed. And the delay, and no one wants to build a Lightning Network without the malleability fix. The Lightning Network could have been built. Like had the Lightning developers were informed from day one, malleability bug fix will never be fixed because it's too controversial. I remember having this
I don't think that was true. Hang on, let me just jump in on that. So this is where I think people, because BCH, for instance, has a fix for transaction malleability. It was not done with SegWit, but it was done. And as far as I'm concerned, no big blocker essentially ever has even had an issue with the Lightning Network. The whole argument was just, it's not Lightning Network or a block size increase. We should just do both and let the free market decide. And that's where I feel like it sounds to me like Jihan was right in that he said we need to get the transaction malleability fix in with the block size increase, because he knew what would happen is what happened with SegWit 2x, where they put in the transaction malleability fix and then SegWit 2x failed because the block size increase part got rugged later. So it made sense that he was trying to make it a package deal.
Right. So we agree again, but we see it differently. Like we agree on the facts, right? And the facts are transaction malleability, for some reason, for some crazy reason, and I don't know why, for some crazy reason, and this happens in government all the time. Like you would think that if something is good, you just push that one thing, but no, every politician has to stick some kind of pork, has to stick some kind of conditions, right? So this is what happened. For some crazy reason, transaction malleability bug fix was not getting through on its own. It had to be combined with a block size increase. And now the block size increase part is getting debated and delayed for so long that the transaction malleability fix is getting delayed for 1 to 2 years. That now delays the development of the Lightning Network by 1 to 2 years delayed. And now when this shit finally comes in, in the middle of 2017, the Lightning Network begins being built in the middle of 2017, not in early 2016 like it could have been, not in 2015 when the Lightning Network was first proposed as an idea, right? Everything.
But now hang on a second. But now you're making an argument for urgency that you felt like the Lightning Network was really urgent and needed, which was the same urgency the big blockers were feeling about a block size increase. And it's the urgency that you criticized of the NOTS guys for going ahead with their anti-spam plans now. So why is it that it was okay to be urgent about that?
No, but this is what I mean, right? That's the thing. It probably wasn't an urgency, right? But it became a talking point, right? Because the Lightning Network was delayed for a couple of years, I'm not saying the Lightning Network would have been, would have resolved the late 2017 high transaction fees. The Lightning Network might not have been ready to the point it's ready today. And some people will debate whether the Lightning Network is even all that functioning today, right? But the Lightning Network development could have started 1.5 years earlier. And again, perhaps the late 2017 high fees could have been, 25% cheaper, 30% cheaper. This could have sped up the Lightning Network's development in its middle stages, not in its early stages, right? But again, this is what happens. And then the talking point immediately became, well, where's your Lightning Network? Where's your Lightning Network? Like a lot of us knew that Lightning Network would take years before it's, production ready, but the people that would be using it against it. Same thing like I gave an example with that city, right? Like the city had its hands tied behind its back to create this economic activity, and now the people that made that happen, the people that slowed down the malleability bug fix, the people that, and again, it's also developer time, right? These developers, instead of focusing on development, now they're spending half their day arguing in forums, going on podcasts, like if you remember Eric Lombroso, right? One of the top developers of SegWit. I mean, he had to retire from Bitcoin for like years. He got burned out. He didn't get burned out from coding SegWit. He got burned out from being on every possible podcast, arguing with people like over why SegWit needs to get pushed into production. So again, it's developer time, it's developer mental stress, like all of that factors in. So because of this massive delay, the whole scaling of Bitcoin through Lightning was so delayed, and that certainly didn't help matters, right? So, but yes, that was the SegWit was two things, and they had to be together because Jihan Wu had, the biggest mining operation at the time, and he wasn't very interested in the Lightning Network because he saw it as taking away miner fees. He also wasn't interested in fixing transaction malleability because of, it was ant bleed and covert ASIC boost. And he was enjoyed mining empty blocks that, what's his name? The Greg Maxwell, reverse engineered and discovered. So there were reasons why Jihan Wu and Bitmain and his friends that were dominating mining were against the transaction malleability fix, but also there was a technical reason why Jihan Wu and his friends in the mining space wanted a bigger block. And this was my big thing. So this is the other thing I want to mention about bigger blocks. So increasing the block size and the big block movement didn't want to just do 2 megabyte blocks. You guys wanted to go straight to 8 or get to 8 megabytes as soon as possible.
Yeah, and this is something that often gets misconstrued as well too, because you see people are frequently making the claim now that the big blockers were not willing to compromise or they weren't willing to adapt their worldview when nothing could be further from the truth. From my point of view, I believe Gavin's initial proposal was 20 megabytes, and then it came down to 8 megabytes, and then Adam Back even said we should do a 248 megabytes, and then it was 2 megabytes, and then it was SegWit 2x, and then the 2x part got rugged. So actually, it was like the big blockers made all the compromises as it turned out in the end. So there was no compromising thing, I think, is a complete rewrite of history from everyone who says that.
I completely agree with you, though I will debate the rug part a little bit. So yes, completely agreed, right? The big block movement wanted 20 megabyte blocks. You guys compromised down to 8, and then the suggestion was, well, we can't go straight to 8. Let's have a plan to go to 2, then to 4, then to 8. Okay. Now, here's the problem with it. There's 2 problems with this situation. Now, I understand why the big miners wanted this, because I don't even know which one is more important. I'm just going to name the 2, and then I'm going to dive into them a little bit. Okay. So going to a bigger block, whether it's 2 megabytes or 8 megabytes or 20 megabytes, I mean, the bigger, the worse both problems. You have 2 issues. One, you need to hard fork the code, which requires massive consensus. And by the early 2017, I became pretty confident that there will never be consensus to hard fork Bitcoin. I mean, we were all learning how this would work, right? So even in 2016, the core developers were open to the idea of hard forking Bitcoin to a bigger block, whether that bigger block is 2 or 4 or 8 or 128. Like it doesn't matter, right? It's some kind of multiple of 2 for simplicity and for coding purposes, right? So the conclusion was, you know what? Hard forking Bitcoin is probably going to be impossible unless the other option is the depth of the code. So there's some kind of bug that's going to happen in like 45 or 80 years, and you must hard fork Bitcoin, or a quantum situation where a quantum computer is actually starting to break something. It's like, yeah, everyone is going to hard fork Bitcoin. Consensus will be instant. Okay. So the core developers came to the conclusion that hard forking is going to be very, very challenging because you're not going to get consensus. So that's one reason why people like myself realize that, yes, the big blockers are compromising, but they're compromising from an impossibility position, right? So it's kind of like, let's say you and I decided we need to do, you want to do this podcast from Mars. And I want to do this podcast from Earth. And somehow we need to meet in the middle. But how do we meet in the middle when one endpoint is an impossibility, right? So once some of us came to the conclusion that you are compromising from an impossible position of accomplishing the hard fork because there won't be consensus. From my point of view, there can't be a compromise because one endpoint is impossible. Okay, yeah, we can debate that part. So that's one reason why going with a bigger block was not going to be possible. So the core developers came to this conclusion, and the other reason is that a bigger block, and Bitfury wrote a really good paper on this. So even if, let's say, hard forking to a bigger block was possible, a bigger block by 2 megabytes, if that block starts to get full into 2 megabytes, the propagation of that block through the world after a miner finds the block is increased by 1/3 of a second. Now, 1/3 of a second for a 2 megabyte block may not be a crazy big deal, but for a giant miner like Bitmain, 1/3 of a second could make a difference. But also, he's thinking further down the line. If a 2 megabyte block gives him 1/3 of a second advantage, an 8 megabyte block now gives him a 2-second advantage because it doesn't scale linearly. It starts to scale exponentially. So the second problem with going to a bigger block, assuming a hard fork is possible, is that a miner who found the last block now starts to get more of an advantage of finding the following block. And since Jihan had the advantage of not fixing transaction malleability, he was willing to give up his advantage of transaction malleability bug fixing if he now has a slight advantage of his massive mining farm with an extra few seconds on finding the following block. So he was all for having a bigger block. In fact, spamming these big blocks, even let's say there was no controversy. Let's say Bitcoin was able to hard fork to an 8 megabyte block and fix transaction malleability. And all the Bitcoiners, BitcoinCash people, big blockers, and myself, we're all together. Everyone is one big happy family. Jihan is very happy. He's getting 8 megabyte blocks. And now he has a 2-second advantage on his massive mining farm because he's still incentivized to spam the shit out of Bitcoin, make this block fully 8 megabytes. This is also 8-9 years ago. It's a lot easier for everyone on the network to see these blocks. And but back then, he would have had another 5-6 year advantage to finding the following block. His mining operation probably would have grown. And they were pretending like there were multiple pools, but they were all together. They were all out of China. This is before the China mining ban, right? So he was looking at it strategically. How do I retain my domination of mining? And for him, a bigger block was the way to go if he's giving up on mining empty blocks. Now he wants to mine full blocks. And the more full the block, the better advantage he has on finding the following block. So, and between these two reasons, between giving Jihan a mining advantage on a future block and the inability of getting consensus for a hard fork, the compromise that small blockers, I'm going to say big blockers, small blockers, the compromise of the small blockers was, well, we can make a sleight of hand block size increase through witness data that Luke Dash was instrumental in figuring out how to do it through a soft fork. Okay, fine. If we have to compromise with the big blockers, let's compromise through witness data. If everyone starts using witness data, a block could be a block weight of up to 4 megabytes. we get our transaction malleability fix, and let's do it this way. Now, Jihan and a few other, friends of Roger, like Brian Armstrong, and it's funny. So Brian Armstrong has me blocked on Twitter from like 2017, right? Probably because here's how I refer to Brian Armstrong. Like, he loves shitcoins. There's never been a shitcoin he didn't like, right? Very similar to David Bailey as well, right? Like these guys run the biggest Bitcoin companies. They name their companies pretty much Bitcoin Magazine and Coinbase. They name their companies after Bitcoin. They love shitcoins way more than Bitcoin. So here's how I refer to Brian Armstrong. Brian Armstrong to me is the what's his name? Who's the CEO of Amazon? I get Bezos, right? So Brian Armstrong is the Bezos of Bitcoin who happens to hate online shopping with a passion, right? That's how I refer to Brian Armstrong, right? Runs the biggest company in Bitcoin, hates Bitcoin, right? So these companies like Coinbase, like BitPay, because Roger was a big investor in these companies, right? They're friends with Roger. So they're like believing Roger that Bitcoin needs scaling through a bigger block. So you have companies like Coinbase, like Jihan, and then Bitmain, BitPay, and these companies really they may or may not believe in that a bigger block is better, but they may believe it. Like, I don't know what people think or believe, but they are adamant that you need a bigger block. So a double compromise was made. Hey, let's get SegWit, which is malleability fix, and a sleight of hand block size increase through witness data. And then we will look to hard fork to a 2x block. And this was the New York agreement. So but going into the New York agreement, the Bitcoin core developers had already, not only did they know that there's no way in hell Bitcoin is forking to a 2 megabyte block, the community of, I'm going to call them thought leaders for the lack of a better word, okay? Like myself and Jimmy Song running the podcast, there were a handful of others. Like the thought leader community already knew that there's no way Bitcoin is forking to 2 megabytes. So I don't understand how in the world any company going into the SegWit 2x agreement believed that a hard fork is possible. To me, I think it was a face-saving agreement. And everyone knew when they agreed to the 2x agreement that Bitcoin is not actually going to fork. They knew it.
I don't know about that. Well, see, here's the thing. Well, they didn't have to have known.
It's not possible.
No, I don't think they did have to have known. Like, okay, so firstly, Jihan and Brian, speculation about their motivations and so forth, they would have to defend themselves separately on that. And you said about the hard fork and also the relay of the blocks, right? So the relay with the blocks, that's no longer a problem anymore because we have compact block technology, which mitigates the issue, not entirely, but almost all of the way. And I think even at that time, that was still known about. People still knew about compact block technology, maybe just hadn't been well implemented. Like there was certainly discussion of Bloom filters. Gavin Andreessen worked on that, if I remember right.
100% agree. 100% agree. This was discussed, and the big blocker side was saying, "Hey, we have all this technology. It's not gonna give miners an advantage." Yes, all of that technology was discussed. Whether a big block would give miners an advantage or not. I agree with you. It was discussed. I was skeptical on that technology. And also I was skeptical on, just like anyone signing the 2x agreement should have been skeptical. Is this actually going to go through? I was skeptical. Well, if Jihan is pushing for a bigger block to have an advantage, why wouldn't he slow down progress on propagating these blocks, right?
That's
because
true.
The way he was stopping the malleability fix.
Yes. Yeah. So anyway, history has been written now, and we know, like, it seems like that's not going to be a problem. Like, again, BCH got a transaction malleability fix. Complex block stuff is all, kind of working. I don't know what the latest state is. It hasn't been super necessary, but I don't think anyone would have any problem with it if it came to that. The hard fork part is quite interesting because I've not heard this argument before that people thought that a hard fork would not be possible because Bitcoin had hard forked before that in 2010 and 2013, right? But of course it had grown.
That's debatable. I'm not technical enough to debate it, but that statement
was the
debatable with a more technical person.
Right. Well, but anyway, this idea that a hard fork was not feasible, I think is quite interesting because it's true. BTC hasn't had a hard fork since, and it didn't at the time. And then BCH has, but it took 2 more splits with BSV and XCC before we finally started getting it right and were able to have hard forks also with consensus, which we have the last 5 years, and there'll be another one in May.
You have to admit, the smaller the community, the easier it is to fork.
That's true. That is true. That is true. Yes, it's definitely easier to get a smaller community on the same page. My counter to that is that's true, but it's not the only factor. For instance, you can see it's much easier to do a fork when the price is going up because everyone's happy. When the price is going down, then that's when people get fighting and arguing, right? So like Ethereum, they do a hard fork, and that's also a different case because you can argue like Vitalik basically sways it. And interestingly, there was that one guy who came out, and I can't remember his name, but he published a blog where it was basically like behind the scenes. Vitalik kind of calls the shots. But anyway, the point is that culture, history, price sentiment, community alignment, those things play into it as well. So I'm not totally convinced that BCH at the size that BTC would not be able to do a hard fork upgrades, but it's possible. We'll just have to wait and see. The BCH community can only prove that if we can maintain this streak and grow the community. So that's 2 huge challenges, but it will be interesting to find out.
But you would agree my recollection of how things went down is fairly accurate in time sequence and the thinking that took place at the time.
I agree. I didn't know that. I would dispute that Brian or Roger or any of those guys
we don't know
that a hard fork was not possible. I think they thought a hard fork was possible.
They might have thought a hard fork was possible. I can go back and rewatch my podcast. Yes. I was pretty sure that a hard fork would not be possible. So anything that could be done. So let's entertain the fact that I'm kind of right. Let's just entertain that.
You were right.
Now.
Yeah, you were right. Yeah.
Even in real time, right? It's kind of like the New York Agreement was a face-saving agreement where these companies don't look stupid. They're like, okay, we're going to agree to SegWit, and then we're going to push for to still make a bigger block. And some people were very adamant about getting that bigger block. That would be Jeff Garzik. So Jeff Garzik continued on the 2-block path, and even after SegWit got in, like this idea of forking to a bigger block kind of started to go away fairly quickly. Garzik was still very adamant that we promised Coinbase and BitPay and Jihan we're going to go to a bigger block, and he kept pushing to fork Bitcoin to a bigger block. The community mostly ignored it, and then he gave up, and then someone else ran his code, and it failed, like with a massive bug.
Yes, I mean, it is very reminiscent, obviously, of the debate. Now we're going to have to get to that if we're going to have any time for it pretty shortly. But I mean, you've got to take this all in context, which is that in August, Amaury had already split off BCH. So at that time, that made things good in a way for the big blockers because they had a place to go where they didn't need to discuss and debate this same issue. But at the same time, then it split the factions between people who were like sticking with hoping for 2x, which interestingly included Roger, which is why there's still, again, this fake misinformation. It's been debunked so many times, but people still think Roger created BCH when he had nothing to do with it. It was Amaury and possibly Simon Dixon I was talking about that Jihan had told him that he was helping to fund Amaury to do that. When I asked Amaury about it, he didn't mention anything about Jihan funding, but that might have been involved. In any case, Roger was not involved until much later, and at the time that the SegWit 2x fell apart, that was when Roger was like, shit, okay, it's BCH or nothing in order to make
right. So let me
big
give
blocks work.
one more thing straight on the timeline, right? So initially, the discussion was, let's do we have to fix. Everyone agreed transaction malleability needed to be fixed. The only one that didn't want it was Jihan. And we didn't even know why at the time. Later we found out it's because of ASIC boost. So the only one that was against transaction malleability fix was Jihan. So even the Bcash side wanted transaction malleability fix. In my recollection, the Bitcoin Cash movement of big blockers were very unhappy with segregated witness. And
yes.
And that's the thing. I actually know Bitcoiners. I may bring him onto the show because I know the guy personally. He was very against segregated witness. A lot of people think that segregated witness breaks Bitcoin and will create massive problems down the line. This is from people that, like, some people only wanted a transaction malleability fix. Bitcoin should stay 1 megabyte block size. Let's fix transaction malleability. Let's not fuck with witness data. Let's not fuck with
block size increase.
A hard fork, block size increase. Let's just fix transaction malleability. Let's get the Lightning Network in and go from there. Honestly, in hindsight, that probably, if I had a time machine, this is what I would push for, right? That. Now, the Bcash side, the Bitcoin Cash side, the big blocker Bitcoin Cash side, didn't want the witness data increase, the sleight of hand increase. You guys wanted a malleability fix plus a bigger block, okay? Yeah. And that's why you branched off. Then there was a side, the Garzik side, I'm gonna call it the Garzik side, which wanted transaction malleability fix, and they wanted witness. They were perfectly happy with witness data, and they wanted a bigger block, right? They wanted all three. That's the side that got no action. Like, no one actually did that. And the small group that did do it, it broke.
Failed. Yes.
It broke the day of the launch, right? So that part never happened, okay? And the legacy, the current legacy chain ended up with transaction malleability fix plus SegWit plus witness data that got expanded into Taproot, more SegWit-ish data that led to shitcoining on top of Bitcoin. So, like, I wish there was a path where we got transaction malleability and absolutely no block size increase of any form, right?
Well, I wouldn't have gone with that. I would have still been like, fuck it, let's chain split. You've got to have the bigger box, man.
Right, but that's the thing. A lot of people wouldn't have gone with that because and again, I'm going back here, because the transaction malleability fix was delayed for 1.5 years, and Lightning development was delayed for 1.5 years. And the debate started, and the debate that Roger started the big block debate. That debate convinced a lot of us, myself included, that Bitcoin block needed to be bigger. We debated on how it needed to be bigger, but he was able to convince everyone, the core developers, Luke Dash-Jur, Luke Dash-Jur still wants a smaller block, but obviously he assisted in creating a bigger block. So that means that the debate convinced the community that a block needs to be bigger. Again, in hindsight, I wish I wasn't convinced that a block needed to be bigger. I was convinced that I was also in support of the witness data increasing the block size. In hindsight, I wish I wasn't convinced of that, but a lot of us were convinced that blocks needed to be bigger for scaling. And that is what led to us not having an option for no witness data, 1 megabyte blocks, plus malleability fix. Okay, and now we're in a situation where by doing that in 2017, now the legacy chain is being debated on going backwards and removing some of those features. So like Bitcoin is definitely an exciting place. All right, so where do you want to go from here?
Well, we've only got like 20 minutes left. I feel like, we've got so much left to cover, and I know we're on a schedule.
We can try to go to the top of the hour. We'll see.
Okay, all right. Well, tell me a little bit about why you like my meme so much. I made this meme of the similarity between BCH and the Knots guys as they were arguing, because I felt like it was very reminiscent, and it seems like maybe you do too, in that we had, they were making all the same arguments, right? The core devs have been captured. I've been censored. They've backed off on that, but there was the mailing list and the GitHub and all these, problems, even on Reddit as well. They're like, this urgency element will kill Bitcoin if we screw this up. Luke Jr. said he was raping my node, which reminded me a lot of Roger Ver. The death of the baby is a very sort of emotional charged thing, right? Bitcoin isn't for everyone. It's a big conspiracy. Companies influencing the code run my alternative node, whether it was XT or Classic, and now it's Knots and the BIP 110 stuff. Fight back with my miners. Again, you've got to have a mining element in there. And also, they've kind of given up on that now a little bit. But at the time when I made this, which was May of last year, I think, they were saying very heavily, it's not realistic to just split off, because it was like, well, if you don't like it, just split off, which was the same thing the big blockers felt until they'd heard it enough times that they were like, okay, fine, screw you, we'll actually do it. So I feel like it's very similar, but it seems you do too, right?
It's super similar. The one thing that I don't like about that graphic is you have I wish you would have put, like Jihan Roger pictures next to each other on the top line, Mechanic versus Mechanic and Crater, and then you put Amarisa
Crater wasn't
Shea.
as big into it, yeah.
So so it's like Luke and Jihan. Like Jihan is not a dev, and Luke is the only dev. So and Amarisa Shea was the main dev.
Yes.
So you could put like if you were to redo this, have Luke and some anonymous developer, Dathon Ohm, which is a whole other like stupidity, right? like that we can talk about that all day, right? So you have Luke and Amarisa Shea Luke and Dathon Ohm versus Amarisa Shea and Gavin Andreessen. So I remember Gavin Andreessen as being a big part of the big blocker camp. Jimmy doesn't remember Gavin Andreessen as being part of the big blocker camp at all. He's like, oh no, it was all Amarisa Shea. I'm like, no, Gavin was clearly a big part of it, right? So that's the only thing. It's like I'm looking at Luke and I'm looking across from Luke and I'm seeing Jihan and I'm like, that makes no sense. But Jihan also had a lot of money, so maybe you can say Jack Dorsey is the Jihan, right? Like, so they're more on a Jihan funded Bitmain, Jack Dorsey funded Ocean, right? So it's just like comparability thing, the visual part of it. But as far as the quotes, yeah, it's exactly the same, right? You have a small community that is being very, very vocal and very, very convincing. See, this is the part that's most similar. It's convincing. The Roger Ver road show of being very convincing that Bitcoin is going to die if it doesn't scale through his solution. And the same thing here. It's a roadshow that Bitcoin is going to die if it doesn't I'm not going to say it's because it's not a scaling problem this time, right? If it doesn't fight the spam, and not only fight the spam with their solution. Like it's not only the fight, it's like they're angry that the core developers are not acknowledging that there is a problem. They're very angry that core developers are not even concerned that the problem exists. And then these guys are also have the only solution to the problem that core developers aren't even acknowledging. And it was the same thing back then. It's like core is not acknowledging the fact that Bitcoin isn't scaling for for this demand of buying stickers from Roger Ver's website, right?
Yes.
Core isn't acknowledging that this is a problem, and we have the perfect solution, right? So there's two things.
I don't know about the perfect solution. That's the tricky part, because I think you're right that the primary issue is that it's not being acknowledged. But then even when you get past that, it's kind of like, well, our solution is the solution because it's the only solution. Like people are not saying, here's another way to fix the spam, right?
Well, here's the thing, right? So here's where I can debate you, right? Because when the core developers eventually did acknowledge Roger Ver's problem, they came up with their own solution of segregated witness to increase the block size. And that made the Roger camp even more angry that they came up with another solution.
Well, yes and no. I feel like, another solution, it has to be a solution that you find valid, right? Which is the same problem that might happen now, in the minds of the core developers, removing the 100, whatever it is, the cap on data carrier size actually is part of the solution, but the BIP 110 guys reverse that and they disagree that that's going the wrong direction, right?
But Jeremy, you have to give me this, right? In order for Roger to force the core developers to acknowledge the problem, he called them every curse name in the book, right? Called them corrupt, called them it's a cabal, it's they're working like it's all in the book, right? Which I didn't even read, but I know it's in the book, right? So he demonized the core developers so much that any solution they would come up with, he would never acknowledge it, no matter what it was, because he sees them as the enemy.
I don't know. I feel like that's speculative. At the time, Gavin was a core developer. It depends where in the history we draw the lines, right? But at the time, Gavin was a core developer. Mike Hearn wasn't out of there. Jeff Garzik was one of the core developers.
Yes.
So it's this whole labeling of core versus not core developers is a bit artificial. But there was enough people, and clearly he was. Okay, well, again, it's very speculative. He's not here to defend himself, and we can't say his motivation, right? But the fact that he was keen for SegWit 2x showed, at least in my mind, that he would have been open to a solution that he felt got most of what he needed, basically.
Right. If the core developers that he respected, like Garzik, Hearn, and Andreessen, if these core developers agreed with the core solution, he would be on board. But the solution that core came back with was against the core solution from these three names. Yes. And these three names ended up being booted out because they disagreed. Right. So right. It was, and again, this is where core is not Roger's view that core is the centralized corrupt entity is disproven right there, because they fractured. They like Garzik, Hearn, and Andreessen, who were top 3 out of 10, not top 3, but they were 3 of the top 10. They disagreed with the rest of the core people, and hence went into the split.
Yeah, and so then, how do we bring that forward to today? You have Luke has basically been excommunicated from core in a similar way, but he hasn't had anyone jump on his team. That's kind of an interesting element to that. There's no other sort of known or respected core developers that have left with him in that way. What do you think of that?
So a core developer recently resigned. I don't know if you saw his long tweet. So a core developer.
Which one was that?
I don't remember, but I don't know the name. But about 2 weeks ago, a core developer wrote this whole post about how he's very unhappy with core and he's basically resigning. So a core developer did resign because he's unhappy with core, but he did not join the BIP 110 Knots team, right? Okay. Now, another core developer, John Attack, whose presentation we discussed on my show with Jimmy, he is very unhappy with core. I don't believe he resigned yet, but I can see him resigning in the near future. And I know he has a good relationship with the Knots side, but also no one knows if he is to completely disassociate from Core, would he join the Knots team? Nobody knows, right? But I just know that based on John's presentation, he's very unhappy with Core. There's probably other people very unhappy with Core, but unhappy with Core, leaving
Not
Core
the same thing. Yeah.
and joining Knots are very different things, especially in light of the more recent momentum where more and more Bitcoin thought leaders are speaking out against BIP 110. And by speaking out against BIP 110, like BIP 110 is now too associated with Knots. I know they're kind of independent, but they're also not really independent, right? So it's like this quasi-dependency. And I think the one mistake that I think this is why the ocean mining pool is probably dead, and in the like a year from now, and Knots would also be dead a year from now, is because Ocean should have tried to disassociate from Knots as much as they could, but considering
they've somewhat tried, but it's kind of all the same people, so. In reality, so people know it's kind of the same thing.
Very difficult. But on top of that, Knots should have disassociated from BIP 110, which they didn't, right? So, what the Knots could have had momentum if Luke and Mechanic, if instead of fully supporting Knots, even though Luke is probably the main coder behind Knots, and he would never admit it, Dathon Ohm is an anonymous developer who has no history. Clearly, Dathon Ohm is a I don't want to say good developer. Like there's no metric for that, right? Dathon Ohm is an experienced developer. Okay, who is Dathon Ohm? It could be a brand new developer who has never coded in Bitcoin. Unlikely. It could be a Bitcoin developer who has developed in Bitcoin under a name we all know, and now doing it, created new accounts, created a new GitHub, created a new Twitter, and it's someone that we all know if we knew who he was. And another option is Dathon Ohm is not a single person. It is almost like, Dread Pirate Roberts from the movie, or like
like Shaolin Fry. That's why it's so funny.
Right, like Shaolin Fry, exactly, right? So it is multiple developers working together as this entity, Dathon Ohm, and one of these has to be Luke, right? So in reality, what should have happened was Knots should have realized how dangerous BIP 110 is, just like a lot of us realized how dangerous it is to try and push for a bigger block. See, if Roger Ver him and I had like private DMs quite a bit, where he was trying to convince me to sway me to a bigger block, to a hard fork, to a bigger block. And my answer to him was, the more people you sway to a bigger block, the more likely we are to have a 50-50 hash rate split. And the closer we are to a 50-50 hash rate split, the more dangerous it is for everyone. The more dangerous it is for you, the more dangerous it is for us. Like all of Bitcoin could have been dead, right? So this is the situation here. Now, had Luke and Mechanic and Crowder, had they realized that BIP 110, the worst outcome is a 50-50 hash rate split, that would kill both sides, right? Like if they get the majority of the hash rate, they win. If they get zero hash rate, they lose. And everyone is happy. But the worst case scenario is a 50-50 split, right? And realizing that a 50-50 split is actually likely in this case, they should have walked away from BIP 110. They should have realized that very early on, like 2 months ago, like if in the first 2 to 3 weeks, BIP 110 is not getting the kind of momentum SegWit did in the first 2 weeks, you got to realize that, okay, we got to walk away from this. If they had walked away from this, they would have built a lot more momentum through just knots and then tried again in a few years when they had consensus. But they don't have consensus. And at this point,
we're going. I don't know. I think we're going. I know we got to wrap up unless you want to do an extra time. But I promised you that I would keep it to time.
We can go a little. We can go a little extra. We can go a little extra.
Okay, all right. But I feel like we're going full circle here then, because it comes back to urgency, right? Is that they feel like a few more years is too slow, just like big blockers feel like or felt like at the time. Here's our chance to onboard everyone to Bitcoin. We need the bigger block. So it really comes down to, I think, under what circumstances a small community or a section of the community can feel justified in, like, it's now or never, right? Because there has to be a line somewhere at which you're able to pull the trigger. Like when you say a 50-50 split would be the worst outcome, I think it would be the worst outcome in the short term, but I think it would maybe be the best outcome in the long term, because then people can be on both sides. The same way that I'm very glad that BCH exists now. And for instance, they had this split with BSV, right? So when BSV split off, it was kind of like, all right, you guys can go and crash land your own project the same way that BTC people look at BCH, right? And that was terrible at the time, but in hindsight, it was great because they had their project and now they can't come back to ours unless they want to admit they were wrong, because we just say, you did it your way and it sucked. Like, you already found that out. So wouldn't it be the same if there was a 50-50 split? Or a chain split of any kind?
From outside looking in, like I remember I did a whole live stream, a 6-hour live stream doing the BCH, BCH, BSV split. I think that was the most fun I had over a 24-hour period in Bitcoin, because I was watching this this implosion and war on a side that was not going to affect me financially whatsoever, right?
Yes.
But this time around, it is us. So you're watching it and laughing your ass off, like I was. Like, karma's a bitch, right?
Yes.
But
it is great. It is great. But like, even at the time, like, I think the BCH community now feels in hindsight, or certainly I do anyway, and I think it's probably not an uncommon sentiment, that all of the splits, the BTC, the BSV, the XCC split, they were all good, because now people can have it their way. Of course, the stakes are pretty high because everybody's so invested financially, emotionally, ideologically in Bitcoin, and it is maybe the one shot humanity ever gets, right? But I could see a world where, and it's interesting because Mechanic in his more recent video was talking about a proof of work change, which means that the door is open in his mind for, okay, maybe we are a minority, we make some sacrifices, but we get the project we want, and then that succeeds or fails on its own merit. I'm fascinated by that outcome.
Right. And this is I guess this is also, there's so much similarity here, right? And remember, during the BC, I'm sure you guys were very happy with the BSV splitting off, right? Because you guys had Calvin Ayre, who has a history of, pedophilia in his background, right?
Yes.
And you had Craig Wright, which was a very controversial developer, if we can call him that, right? And this side has this, the same issues. There's a very controversial developer on the not side, and you have the whole Epstein Island accusations on the other side. So there's like similar talking points are back. But I would say that, and this is the thing. This is the scary part. Luke has so many radical ideas. Yes, he is a genius developer, but genius developers tend to have very radical ideas. And he's always wanted to change proof of work, and he's always wanted to make the block smaller. And a lot of these views require more and more forking, which again was the same concern that we had with the big blocker camp, because the big blocker camp had a roadmap for more and more forking. And the legacy chain, people like myself have this viewpoint: forking, whether it's soft forks, hard forks, it doesn't matter. Forking needs to be kept to a minimum, which again goes back to Taproot, Like, why the hell did we do that, right? Like
You tell me. I don't know.
I think so many people were burned out after the whole SegWit soft fork, and the core developers saw that as an opportunity. So like the Taproot soft fork was almost like a continuation of the SegWit soft fork. It's kind of like, look, we got the SegWit soft fork, but the SegWit soft fork should have also included this Taproot stuff, and no one really wanted another freaking fight, and no one really wanted another split. So a lot of us we didn't question the Taproot enough. We didn't see, maybe we thought that the Bitcoin community was too smart to shitcoin on top of Bitcoin through these extra means, because to us, Ethereum use cases were so stupid that we thought that it wouldn't happen on Bitcoin through Taproot. We didn't understand that many of the Bitcoiners that helped us fight for SegWit, no one expected Udi and Eric Wall and people like Dan Held and a lot of these other guys, or Bitcoin Magazine, David Bailey. Like, we didn't see people from our own side taking advantage of using the Bitcoin blockchain for Ethereum's use cases. Like, we just didn't see it coming from Bitcoiners. Like we might have seen it, maybe some Ethereum crazies will move over, but we totally underestimated the what Bitcoin Uncensored guys used to call it affinity scams, right? We grossly underestimated Bitcoiners that were Bitcoin only, using their affinity, using their following inside Bitcoin to convince Bitcoiners to shitcoin. And I can put Richard Hart in that as well, because Richard Hart started out as like a fake Bitcoin maxi, but at least Richard Hart started his own blockchain. He didn't try to shitcoin on top of Bitcoin because he wanted to be a billionaire earlier, right? So he didn't have this opportunity. He started his shitcoining before Taproot came in. But we grossly, as a Bitcoin community, underestimated how many like diehard Bitcoiners, and like Jameson Lopp is probably the lowest one in that rank, right?
Okay.
Because like Jameson Lopp invested in several projects that had shitcoin need, but he's not as bad as any of those guys. I'm not happy with many of the things Jameson Lopp did, but Jameson Lopp is like my lowest tier, and I would say Peter Todd is even like more of a Bitcoiner, pure Bitcoin, right? Peter Todd is a Bitcoin maxi. It's just that like the Bitcoin kind of needs a guy like Peter Todd who's a Bitcoin maxi, but he will push the Bitcoin maxi side to the point of the Bitcoin blockchain like realizing, hey, you know what? We need to be more resilient. So I know Matt Odell like really doesn't like Peter Todd, but I don't have as much of a problem with Peter Todd because I don't see him as ever shitcoining. I just see him as like, it's kind of like tough love, like he has this tough love for Bitcoin. He's a Bitcoiner, or it's like kind of like if you're going to teach your kids to like swim, like one way is to like stay in a pool with them and teach them to swim, and the other way is to throw them in the pool. And like if you come really close to drowning, I'll then jump in and save you. So that's kind of like Peter Todd's approach to Bitcoin, right? It's like, but we completely underestimated the people we considered pure Bitcoiners to just straight up shitcoin on top of Bitcoin. And again, in hindsight, Taproot should have got a lot more pushback, but we were all so worn out from the prior war. But going forward, it's going to be very difficult for Core to change things. And here's the thing, this change to op return, removing the op return limit, it's freaking irrelevant. Like, here's the thing, it's kind of like it was the final straw. It was that little straw that broke the camel's back of removing the op return limit. which was not a consensus rule change. It did not require a soft fork. And it started this such a giant, it was just basically what caused the split. And it'll be very difficult for Core to push another taproot. It'll be almost impossible to push another taproot. And I mean, that's all I can really say. Like, yeah, I guess I'll leave it here. I think I'm like rambling at this point.
No. I mean, I think it's very interesting. I mean, I don't know how much more time you have left, but we do have, if you want to finish in 10 minutes, we do a segment that we round out every show with called Message to the Community, where we just give our guests, a couple minutes to say whatever they think the BCH community needs to hear. I'm still quite interested in this concept that we were talking about a little bit before of what you think you would need to see in BCH to actually be more interested in it. I don't know whether it's more hash rate, whether it's a certain technical upgrade, whether it's a change in the community. Like, is there any conceivable hypothetical world that you would switch to BCH, or is that just impossible? But I don't know. You can maybe answer that or talk about something else, whatever you think.
Sure. I can answer. I'm also looking at your live comments, and someone in the live comments said, Peter Todd made double spends easy. Yes, and that's what I mean. Peter Todd is a Bitcoiner. He made double spends easy so that the Bitcoiners or the Bitcoin devs address the problem of double spends, right? So this is what I mean by tough love. Yes, he potentially drowned the kid, but he definitely taught him how to swim, right? So yes, this is what Peter Todd does. This is what he does. He pushes the Bitcoin blockchain to its limit for resiliency without ever actually shitcoining. This is literally his reason for living in the space. Reason for still being in the space. So, I mean, I wouldn't switch, right? I even said that I wouldn't even if BIP 110 wins, which I don't believe that it will. But if BIP 110 wins, Bitcoin would no longer be interesting to me. So I would no longer see Bitcoin as decentralized. See, Ethereum was never interesting to me. I've never held a single ETH token ever, which means I've never used Tether. And I wish Tether was on top of Bitcoin, because I probably would be a user of Tether if it was on top of Bitcoin. But because Tether was on top of Ethereum, and this is what a lot of Bitcoin maxis, this is where I disagree with the toxic Bitcoin maxis. Tether should have been on top of Bitcoin. There's nothing wrong with Tether. Even though I was a little more critical of Tether back in the day, I didn't trust the fact that it was backed, things like that. I've walked away from those views. I do think that Tether has a purpose. I think Tether is fairly useful. And had it been on top of Bitcoin, I think it would significantly increase Bitcoin's market value, and it would significantly decrease Ethereum's market value, because Ethereum would have never gotten to such a high market value had it never had Tether. I think that was the biggest, it was the biggest single project on top of Ethereum that increased Ethereum's market cap. It's probably not bigger than all the other stuff Ethereum did combined, but as a single most project, it's Tether. So I can't see myself ever jumping on Bitcoin Cash, because I wouldn't even jump on BIP 110 fork of Bitcoin because of what we said earlier. I would see Bitcoin being centralized going forward. I would see Bitcoin as having a developer team of 3 people that would probably be pushing forks, and they would have, the power and centralization of Bitcoin code. And I would also see this self-policing of nodes. It's like, I wouldn't see the nodes as being decentralized either, because, hey, if the node operators are now willing to censor themselves over what is in the Bitcoin blockchain, then what are they willing to censor themselves about going forward? Are they going to then KYC their nodes if the government tells them they have to KYC their nodes? If all of a sudden, again, Luke, the leader, is a very religious person. Today, he's very adamant that the nodes can't have any illicit material on them. And tomorrow, he's going to decide that nodes can't have any financial transactions that are purchasing things he doesn't agree with, right?
Yes.
So now he's going to push for KYCing everybody's node, right? So I just don't trust. I don't trust him at all as to what he's going to push for next. So if BIP 110 gets the mining majority, which I don't believe that they will, Bitcoin becomes uninteresting to me at all, and I would move on to something else, and my savings vehicle would become the S&P 500, or land, or real estate, or businesses, or investing in startups. Like, it would be, I can give you 10 things that I would prefer over Bitcoin, because I just wouldn't see Bitcoin as unstoppable, censorship resistant, unconfiscatable. I just like all the properties that I respect in Bitcoin. I mean, the 21 million Bitcoin limit would probably still remain, but all these other properties, I wouldn't trust Bitcoin for those properties, and I see them as the most important.
So I'm hearing, about the devs, not enough decentralized, respected devs, and concerns about like sort of leadership. So is there no conceivable world in which, your favorite developers from Bitcoin Core defected either to a BIP 110 chain split or to BCH that would allay those concerns? And you'd think, okay, fair enough.
Here's the thing. My favorite developers are already mostly gone, right? The current crop of core developers, I don't know them like I knew the old crop of developers. We started off this whole conversation with, I'm already not very impressed by core. So my confidence in Bitcoin as a decentralized entity is already not trending in the wrong direction. So BIP 110 winning would just accelerate my mental exponential curve of trending in a further wrong direction. So having the current crop of core developers jumping over to the Knots camp, and it's not going to be all of them, it's going to be like 3 or 4 of them, right? It would only make things worse. Like, it can't possibly make things better.
Interesting. I mean, I think it's interesting that, so much of your perspective is based around that personal credibility and trust. So in a way, that makes me think, well, maybe if you got to know those current crop of core developers, it would change your mind, right? It seems like, is it about the developers, or is it about how well you know and can trust them? That's kind of an interesting...
Possibly. Like, here's the thing, right? And I've always said this going back 10 years in my podcast. Bitcoin is a trustless system, but you have to have trust in the fact that it's trustless, right?
Yes.
So my trust in Bitcoin being trustless is slowly decaying. And if BIP 110 succeeds, that part gets increased by 10x. My trust in Bitcoin being trustless, and it begins with the development of the code. That is the biggest factor of it, right? Like, the mining aspect of it is never been great. There's always been mistrust of miners. And the 2017 fork had a big part to do with that, the distrust of the mining network. And we had to force the miners. And that's another thing. Mechanic doesn't see it correctly. Like, Mechanic actually thinks that a small minority of node operators forced the big bad miners to capitulate. It's quasi-true, but it's not exactly true. There was like 90+% consensus that transaction malleability needed to be fixed, right? The debate was over the block size increase. but he's missing the fact that everyone except one miner was on board with the biggest part of SegWit. So when he says there wasn't consensus for SegWit, he's incorrect, because yes, there wasn't consensus for the block size increase part of SegWit, but there was absolute consensus on the transaction malleability fix of SegWit. And we were going to ram, and the industry wanted it, all the users wanted it. The amount of people that were running the 0.13 and 0.14, 0.14 SegWit compliant node was overwhelmingly at 80-90%. It was the miner signaling that was not in consensus, and because there were a few big miners that were against it. But this is not the case today. There isn't an 80-90% consensus on running the NOTS node, and they're conflicting the fact that only 20-30% of the people upgraded to version 30. So he's conflicting the fact that people not upgrading to the latest V30 core code, as these people don't want core V30. That's not how it works. The reason why people don't want to upgrade their software is because when shit is working, you don't want to upgrade shit. I would still be using Windows XT if I could, right? Like the last thing I wanted to do was upgrade to Windows 8. And here we are like Windows 11, right? So he's conflating the fact that people not upgrading to version 30 means that they hate version 30. In fact, version 30 was like the highest upgraded by percentage client the moment it came out, right?
But that was a counter signal that was uniquely positioned for people to show support, etc., right?
But again, this is the gaslighting of it, right? Because people were counter signaling by downloading Core V30, they downloaded Core V30 with a wallet, destroying bug. And now he's using the fact that there was a bug, and look how many people could have been hurt, because none of these people wanted to upgrade to that client until they knew it was safe, but they were forced to upgrade into it as a counter signal, which that side is now using as another reason why Core sucks, right? So this is this is the problem with it. So he's completely misusing, misremembering, or he doesn't even know what kind of consensus there actually was during 2017. So I don't know how I got on that tangent, but it's just something I wanted to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I certainly disagree with Mechanic's takes on some of that area as well, too. I mean, he does have a very romantic idea of Bitcoin. Maybe we all do in one way or another. But I think, his belief, his story that he has about the uprising of the nodes, saving the day, and he's kind of seeing things as a replay of that, when maybe in my mind that wasn't very accurate to begin with. But of course they'll be able to put it to the test with their BIP 110. That experience already seems to be teaching him to see things in a slightly different light, and probably will continue to do so. In any case, we're not going to know until it plays out, and this is shaping up to be one of the more interesting years in Bitcoin history, which I would say is good for Bitcoiners of all kinds. Bitcoin is never boring, but it's certainly less boring at the moment.
So just to summarize, right? Like I was already kind of retired from doing Bitcoin content and talking about Bitcoin, right? Like so what I kept saying was, eventually the guy that used to travel the world teaching people how to send an email stops doing that, right? Because everyone eventually learns how to send an email. So I was at a point where I have no reason to talk about Bitcoin. People are using it. I will use it when I need it. I'm not going to talk about it, but I still trust in Bitcoin. That trust in Bitcoin gets completely eroded with the success of this user-activated soft fork. And would I still use Bitcoin? Well, when I need it, right? But I won't trust it as this decentralized, world-changing thing. So I would feel about Bitcoin more similar to how I feel about Ethereum or any other, or Bitcoin Cash or Monero. Like my view of Bitcoin becomes more similar to those other projects, and I have no interest in converting to Ethereum or Bitcoin Cash. But what I do have an interest in, if this succeeds, is to remove my exposure to Bitcoin
Yes.
and look for other things. Will there be another Bitcoin? Probably not. This is our one and only chance. So my ultimate path is, once again, not to talk about Bitcoin. And also, I already said, if this thing succeeds, it means I was wrong, right? Like right now, I'm saying that people pushing for BIP 110 never really understood how Bitcoin works as far as consensus. And if BIP 110 succeeds, that means I didn't really understand how Bitcoin works, because I'm on the record saying this will miserably fail. It has to fail for Bitcoin to stay decentralized. If it succeeds, that means I was wrong. If I was wrong, why would anyone listen to me about the future of Bitcoin? Why would I still speak about Bitcoin? Like
Well, you could be wrong once. Like, I mean, there's nothing wrong with getting it. Everyone gets it wrong sometimes. That's nobody bats 1,000.
Well, that's the thing, right? I would, yes and no, right? Like, I can admit that I was wrong in pushing the SegWit part of Bitcoin because I still believe in Bitcoin, right? But if I'm wrong on this, that means I'm no longer a believer in Bitcoin. And I'm not going to sit here in 3 years from now and say, I was wrong, NOTs and BIP 110 was the right way to go. Because I'm always going to believe that it's the wrong way to go. And if it's the wrong way to go, either I have a podcast promoting a different Bitcoin, which is the minority, right? Like you guys are the minority chain right now compared to Bitcoin. I wouldn't do that. I will never promote the minority chain. If NOTs and BIP 110 wins, they become Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the token with the most cumulative proof of work by weight. And they would have the higher, let's say there is a split and BIP 110 and NOTs has the dominant mining and has a higher Bitcoin price because of it. They become the dominant chain. I will never promote the minority chain. And since I will always believe that the majority, the main chain, is now Bitcoin that I no longer believe in, I would just never speak about it again because I was wrong, but I'm not going to push a minority chain either. So I would, I'm kind of leaning towards starting a transitioning away from geopolitics and even the trading side and just doing a health and wellness podcast. And that's what I probably would do. Bitcoin would never be mentioned other than, sure, I'll take your Bitcoin payment if you want to pay me in Bitcoin. But by that measure, like, hey, you want to pay me in Monero? Whatever. I'll just convert it to something else. I'll convert it to the S&P 500, right? I'll convert it to more real estate. Like I would completely diversify into the future through other assets that I trust more than I would trust Bitcoin.
Yes. Okay. All right. Well, I think we'll leave it on that. Final thoughts. Very interesting. So I have to give a quick shout out. There is a StarCraft 2 tournament going in an hour from now on a fifthofgaming.com. I'm going to be playing in that. So if anybody wants to come battle, you can win prizes in BCH. A Fifth of Gaming is really cool. Check that out. We've got to give a shout out to our FundMe contributors. Majamali, This is a Marathon, Molecular, the show we love, Cash Dragon, Bastion.com, Fair and Decentralized Twitter, @CashStamps, BCH for the win, DGN and FurQ, Sick Rap Anthem, #1 token coming at you, P2P Cash, Smash the Stake, greater than 40% APY, H2P://NWB.cash, Jonald, best podcast ever, Brian Canacci and Anonymous. Thank you to our patrons, Ricky Kyle and HP, and our sponsors, General Protocols. Check out BCHbull.com. Of course, there's more about the podcast at bitcoincashpodcast.com. Final shout outs, Tone, and where can people find more of you?
My name is my brand. So Tone Vays, you find my Twitter, which I kind of stopped tweeting, but I'm back for now. My YouTube channel is probably the best place. I don't know if you'll throw my playlists in the video description, but I have, if anyone wants to go back down memory lane, I have like 3 playlists. A playlist for all my content during the user-activated soft fork of 2017. I have a separate playlist for all my debates with Roger and a few other debates, like debating Nouriel Roubini on Bitcoin itself, debating a few other people.
So I have a debate playlist where you can find my debates with Roger there, and my latest playlist on the current, civil war in Bitcoin between Knots, BIP110, and Core Legacy Bitcoin. I'll probably do a few more episodes, but I do think this movement's going to die. Like it's one of these things where I give them a 5% probability of success, but that 5% probability of success is very, very dangerous, right? It's kind of like, there's a 1% chance of the world having a nuclear war, but if that 1% succeeds, 95% of us die, right? So it's like, it's like one of these things where the chances of it happening are tiny, but if that tiny percent, manages to happen, the outcome is disastrous. And that's why I find this issue very, very important.
Indeed. Jet, any final shout-outs from you this week?
Yeah, my shout out goes to Satoshi Dice. I completely forgot about that. I used to love playing that shit. And Satoshi Stack too. I remember. I might have shouted this one out before, but I was the king of Satoshi Stack, and I wish they brought that shit back. I'd be playing it every day.
You can still play Satoshi Dice, right? I think it still runs on
Satoshi
BCH.
Dice. Yes, but Satoshi Stack was like a king of the hill. The last better wins, and I would just like load up 20 wallets and be like, I'm gonna get the last bet.
You know what's funny? I've played Satoshi Dice once, and I won. And it was like a tiny amount. I just wanted to see how Bitcoin worked, right? So that I believe that was probably my very first transaction, just to see how Bitcoin works. Played it one time, and my outcome was, this is kind of stupid. The only gambling I do these days is poker, because it has some element of skill. I'm not a gambler that is like, I'm not going to be betting on coin flips, because there's no, even when I used to bet on sports, I did it because I thought that, there's an element of skill of which team you think is going to win. But I would never bet on, the coin flip of a Super Bowl. That's just insane, right? That's why I never played Satoshi Dice more than once.
All right. And my shout out goes to you, Tone. Thank you for coming on the show. I've really enjoyed it. I thought it was great that we agree actually on most of the history, maybe just disagreeing in the interpretation in parts. And I think there's going to be, as many views of Bitcoin as there are Bitcoiners, basically. So it was not surprising to see that that's the way it plays out. But we're all in this project to save humanity together in some ways. And so it's amazing that we can have dialogue, and the story will continue to be written, and it's going to be, like I said, a very interesting year in Bitcoin.
I think we also got some of my favorite quotes from this episode ever. Like the Taproot, why the hell did you do that? Amazing. We might have drowned the kid, but at least they let us do it.
Might be in the intro next year, We put some of the best quotes in there. So everybody, thank you all for listening. And our song to finish with today is from Hannah Montana. So enjoy.
Bye, guys.
All right.
You get the limo out front. Hot styles Get your